Hello folks, welcome to another marvelous anime video. Every now and then we get a series where the villains are so iconic that they linger in our minds and captivate our imaginations as much as the plot and the protagonists do. While it's widely accepted that a great story is usually defined by its protagonist, we have to keep in mind that without a great antagonist, every heroic action just falls flat with no gravitas. Kentaro Miura, the genius behind the seminal dark fantasy series Berserk, is well known for not just crafting an intricately detailed world, but equally layered and complex characters. One such character is Griffith, the overarching antagonist of the series. He cleverly juxtaposes the idea of beauty against evil, subverting the usual notion that aligns beauty with goodness and purity while developing Griffith's character. Unlike many caricature villains of such fantasy series, Griffith is beautifully charismatic and noble in the way he behaves. Compared to the protagonist Guts, who's much more crude and boorish in his ways, Griffith is elegant and refined from his mannerisms to his fighting style. This would typically make him more suited to represent the forces of purity and good, but instead, his fall from grace is almost equivalent to the fall of Lucifer, who was the brightest of all the angels. Miura paints a character that seems almost too ideal in every aspect, only to see these very virtues lead to his corruption and fall from grace. From a low-born street urchin to the chosen Falcon of Light, Griffith's character is fascinating and one which we cannot tell without exploring his journey until now. With Berserk now being continued under the care of Kujimori, who is Miura's best friend, we'll have to wait to see how this enigmatic character's tale plays out. So get ready as we take you on a journey through the desolate and god-forsaken world of Berserk as we delve into the life of one of the most iconic villains in all of anime and manga. From his origins, important events in his life, his powers and abilities to his few but notable weaknesses, we'll leave no stone unturned as we explore the character of the individual who was once the man called Griffith, the White Falcon. Early days. Long before his fall from grace and his ascendance as Femto, the fifth and final member of the infernal god hand, Griffith's beginnings were of a humble nature. His lineage is unknown, as is his immediate family and parents, due to Miura never having divulged any of this to the audience. This was perhaps to further accentuate the point that he quite literally came from nothing. As a child, Griffith was a street urchin who spent his day playing with others like him under the towering shadows of the brothels and pubs that lined the area he lived in. They would take pride in the victories won in their childish games, but even then, Griffith knew he was destined for something greater. Even as they played and frolicked in their squalor, ever hungry and unsure of their next meal, Griffith was certain that his life was not meant to be squandered in the dingy and filthy streets of the commoners. Looking up at the looming towers of the castle, he dreamt of one day being a lord with his own kingdom. As fate would have it, one day he would be approached by an old merchant who would hand him an eerie crimson egg-shaped trinket that had facial features seemingly carved into it, and this merchant would foretell how Griffith would one day rule the world. For a boy who dreamt of doing the same, he would eagerly take the trinket from the man, not knowing that causality had already set him on a course that would change not only his life, but the lives of every single person in the world. The trinket he had been given was no ordinary junk. It was called a behelit, and it wasn't just any behelit either. It was the crimson behelit, also known as the Egg of the King, that was said to fall into the hands of a chosen of causality to become a member of the God Hand every 216 years. However, it would be quite some time before this would come to pass, and we'll next talk about the meteoric rise of this street urchin into one of the most fierce warriors and leaders in the history of Berserk. The rise of the White Falcon. Griffith realized the first step to fulfilling his dreams was to gather folks who would follow him and aid him in achieving these goals. He would put together a small group that included an ex-miner called Pippin, a former crook called Corcus, and a tumbler by the name of Judo. This would be the start of what would eventually become the legendary Band of the Hawk. As the four of them traveled across the land looking for work and a means to sustain themselves, they would come across a young woman being harassed by a lustful nobleman who desired to make her his own. Griffith would intervene in the matter and lop off the ear of the aristocrat, but would not kill the man himself. Instead, he offered a sword to the woman known as Casca, telling her to fight for her own fate if she feels it's worth fighting for. With that, Casca would slay her assaulter and promptly join the group as their newest member. Over the next few years, the Band of the Hawk would continue making a name for themselves under their charismatic leader, Griffith. However, he would realize that sustaining his ever-growing group would be a difficult task without proper financial backing. The group would receive their first big break when they would come under the employment of a Tudor aristocrat named Genin. The feudal lord, who was a known pederast, took an immediate interest in the beautiful Griffith, who, noticing this, offered up his body in exchange for wealth and patronage for his group. With the financial security of the Band of the Hawk secured, they began growing in strength and number until the legend of the White Falcon and his group was told across the land. The fateful encounter between Guts and Griffith. Years later, after the Band of the Hawk had become a somewhat established outfit, they were contracted by the Kingdom of Midland to take over a military garrison of the Tudors. However, the fortress easily falls when its commander, a famous knight called Bazuso, is slain by a young mercenary swordsman who goes by the name of Guts. The next day, some of the Band of the Hawk members see Guts wandering around their encampment, and after being egged on by Corcus, they ambush him in order to claim the reward on his head. Unfortunately for them, they grossly underestimated Guts' abilities, resulting in two of them being quickly slain. Griffith, who had been observing the battle, orders Casca to help their comrades, which she does reluctantly. However, even Casca, who had until then never lost to anyone except Griffith, is heavily overpowered by Guts, leading to Griffith himself having to intervene before she's slain. This leads to the first ever clash between these two iconic characters, as Griffith quickly defeats Guts, who's overwhelmed by his opponent's speed. Griffith's interest is, however, piqued by Guts, and he orders his crew to take him to their camp in order to treat his wounds. Once Guts awakens and starts to recover from his injuries, Griffith offers him a position within the Band of the Hawk, which Guts refuses. Griffith then challenges him to a duel with the condition that if he is to emerge victorious once more, Guts would have to join the band. But if he were to lose, then Guts would be allowed to inflict a similar wound that Griffith had inflicted upon him and be free. The duel, however, is pretty lopsided, as Guts is handily defeated by Griffith, leading to him joining the Band of the Hawk. The hero of the 100-Year War. Despite the tides of war having turned in the favor of Midland, they still needed to beat their enemies back to end the 100-year-old conflict. What stood in their way was the fortress of Doldry, a strategic location of immense importance to both armies. This fortress was held by none other than the same Genin whom Griffith had used to secure the future of his group. The problem with Doldry was that no army had ever conquered this fortress, not even the famed White Tiger Knights, who were considered to be Midland's strongest fighting force, had been able to storm it. Stuck in a conundrum, the King of Midland convenes a war council to determine the best course of action. After each of his generals present him with their opinion, he finally turns to Griffith for his input. The White Falcon simply states that he would be able to take the fortress without any issue. When the king asks him if Griffith would need any reinforcements, he declines, saying the Band of the Hawk would be enough for the task. While it was true that the Band of the Hawk was undefeated thus far on the battlefield, many viewed this to be Griffith's hubris speaking rather than his wisdom. Regardless, during the battle, the Band of the Hawk, led by him, Guts, and Casca, easily rout the enemy and capture the impregnable fortress of Doldry. Griffith also slays Genin, avoiding any chance of his previous deeds with the Lord becoming rumors that would affect his reputation. This battle effectively ended the conflict known as the 100-Year War, which was a century-long conflict between the Tudors and Midland. In the aftermath of the battle, the Band of the Hawk became immensely popular with the people of Midland, with the king bestowing upon them the title of White Phoenix Knight, with Griffith becoming the White Phoenix General. With everything he had always wished for finally in the palm of his hand, Griffith would then move swiftly to slay all of his political opponents in one fell swoop and succeed in doing so. With all those who opposed him either dead or terrified of him, and having finally legitimately joined the aristocracy, the pauper had now become a prince, and there was very little that stood between Griffith and his dreams. However, just as the stars seemed to be aligning for the young general, little did he know that causality had other plans for him, and soon his fall from grace would begin. The fall of the Falcon! Just as everything was within Griffith's grasp, fate would play a cruel trick on him. You see, Guts and Casca had once overheard Griffith talking about his idea of a friend. He had claimed that while the Band of the Hawk were his precious comrades, he never thought of them as friends. To him, a friend had to be a person with his own goals and ideals. They would have to be capable of standing up to anyone, including Griffith, if they stood in the path of that dream. Only such a person would be worthy of being considered his friend. These words had a profound impact on Guts, who would realize that all this time, Even he was merely a cog in the machine that was meant to propel Griffith to his dreams. After Griffith's moment of greatest triumph, Guts had finally realized that it was time for him to pursue his own goals so that one day, the man he idolized would acknowledge him as an equal and a friend. The news that Guts intended to go on his own journey would have a huge impact on Griffith's psyche, and just like how the two had dueled so long ago for Guts to join the Band of the Hawk, they would again cross swords, this time to determine his freedom. As the two fierce warriors clashed, the outcome was swift, and the results were clear. Guts breaks Griffith's sword and claims his victory and freedom. The loss of Guts has a profound effect on Griffith, who quickly spirals out of control. In a frenzy of emotions and ill judgment, he beds the Virgin Princess of Midland, Charlotte. Little did he know, at least at that point, the King of Midland had been slowly descending into madness and was coveting his daughter's virginity for himself. This leads to Griffith being imprisoned and tortured mercilessly for his transgression against the crown. The Band of the Hawk is disgraced and banished from the land, hunted as outlaws. Everything that Griffith had built all these years had come crumbling down in mere moments, and the fall of the Falcon was complete. Or was it? The Dark Ascension, the Birth of Femto. In those dark hours, Griffith was broken piece by the torturers until nothing remained of his once beautiful visage. When Guts finally returned from his own journey, he found, to his dismay, all that had befallen the Hawks and their leader. Desperate to rescue Griffith, he makes his way to the tower where Griffith is being tortured and rescues him with the help of some of the oldest members of the Band of the Hawk. However, Griffith, now a broken man, views Guts with resentment and jealousy and partially blames him for his present condition. As the group escapes from the Tower of Rebirth, hotly pursued by agents of Midland, Griffith begins to curse his own fate. Unable to bear his own woeful existence, he tries to find some meaning in it by forcing himself upon Casca, which he is unable to do, and instead breaks down in her embrace. With his body and dreams now in tatters, Griffith musters what little is left of his strength and rides away in his carriage, intent on ending his own life. He's flung into the air from his carriage when it hits a bump, and as he flies through the air, he contemplates life as he lands in a lake. There, he tries to end his own life once again by attempting to impale his throat on a branch, but due to being too weak, all he manages to do is put a gash on his neck. Crying bitterly at his own powerlessness, he doesn't realize that his crimson behelit, which he had lost during his time in the Tower of Rebirth, emerges from beneath the lake and is bathed in his blood. This activates the behelit, and he, along with the Band of the Hawk who had pursued him, is teleported into the astral realm, thus signaling the beginning of the fifth eclipse. As Guts helps Griffith up, they're greeted by the presence of four demonic entities called the God Hand, whose leader, Void, welcomes the Band of the Hawk to what he calls a festival ordained by causality. Griffith is then taken on a metaphysical tour where he's made to understand how causality functions and how his decisions have all inadvertently led to this moment. He's reminded of what his dream is and the mounds of corpses of both friends and foes that have been left in the wake of his pursuit of it. Finally acknowledging the fact that he had already sacrificed so many for his dreams, he accepts his true nature and agrees to sacrifice his comrades for the power to realize his dreams. No sooner had he finished uttering the words than Void began the invocation of doom, and all the Band of the Hawk members present were marked by the brand of sacrifice. They are then devoured, one by one, in a total massacre by the apostles who had gathered there to witness Griffith's ascension. As if this wasn't bad enough, Griffith, who had now ascended and taken up the name Femto, sexually violates a pregnant Casca right in front of Guts. Those who are marked by the brand of sacrifice are destined to meet inescapable death, and everything that Nosferatu Zod had long ago told Guts regarding him meeting such a fate, where Griffith's dream was to fail, had begun to come true. However, just before Guts and Casca are devoured as well, the Skull Knight, an eldritch warrior, breaks into the eclipse and rescues the two remaining survivors. Despite this, the ritual is considered to be fulfilled as Griffith sheds his mortal life and joins the rank of the God Hand as Femto, completing his dark ascension. The Rebirth of the White Falcon. How Griffith returns to the land of the living. Following his ascension, the activities and whereabouts of Femto are not documented very much. He does make the occasional appearance, like during the Black Swordsman arc where the Count manages to reactivate his behelit when fighting Guts, but despite the Black Swordsman's efforts to slay the new Prince of Darkness, that's the closest Guts would ever get to Griffith after the fifth eclipse. As a member of the God Hand, Griffith, or Femto, is now a denizen of the astral plane. In fact, he dwells in one of the lowest regions of the astral plane. Why this is important is because it's widely accepted that people can only travel through the astral plane 2 layers upwards or downwards from the plane that they reside on. This effectively means that the God Hand can never physically manifest themselves in their main form in the physical world. Characters like Guts and Flora are humans who dwell in the interstice, the realm that lies between the physical realm and the topmost layer of the astral plane. This is why they can travel all the way down to Klippa. The Behelits play a major role in mitigating these travel restrictions. What the Behelit essentially does is create a doorway that allows the chosen individual and the God Hand to interact within permissible limits inside the astral plane. For creatures as powerful as the God Hand, it's ironic that they aren't able to fully exercise their power and influence over the very realm where their machinations are most at work. This is one of the biggest handicaps that the God Hand has, as they have to function through mediums like the Behelit and the Apostles to do their handiwork. The primary player in this tale about Griffith's rebirth into the physical world, breaking all the known laws of reality in Berserk, happens to be a very unique individual. This thing, or person, was called the Egg of the Perfect World, and they were an Apostle Behelit hybrid. Yep, you heard that right. The story goes that this once nameless individual was reviled by the rest of humanity so much that they crawled into a pit beneath the Tower of Conviction, forever forgotten and forsaken by the world. However, as time went by, people began to dump corpses into his pit, eventually to the point that this person began to die, forgotten, unnamed, and crushed underneath dead bodies. However, as he was about to perish, he activated his Behelit, which had probably reached him through one of the corpses. It's unclear what exactly he sacrificed, but it's likely that it was his love for humanity. Regardless, he was transformed into this apostle who resembled a Behelit. During the Conviction arc, as Guts makes his way to the Tower of Conviction in search of Casca, who had gone missing, he arrives at the place to find it being run by a group of zealots from the Holy See, led by a man called Mozgus. There's a massive clash between him and these inquisitors who intend on burning Casca as a witch. However, as all this is happening, the Egg of the Perfect World activates itself, sacrificing all the individuals gathered around the tower, giving birth to Griffith in a new corporeal form. In this way, the unthinkable takes place as, for the first time, a God Hand member is reborn into the world, freed from their only limitation, and begins to walk the earth unfettered. How Griffith ushered in the Age of Fantasia and finally achieved his dreams. After being reborn into the physical world, Griffith quickly begins amassing his army, taking command of the Midland Army after liberating the western city of Shet and other places under Kushan rule. The mighty Kushan Empire was led by their emperor Ganishka, who wished to conquer all known lands, much like the fabled King Geiserik. What was fascinating is the fact that Ganishka himself was an apostle, but he stood in direct opposition to the God Hand, as he considered himself to be the only worthy ruler of the world. Coming back to Griffith, after liberating numerous midland settlements, he would rescue Princess Charlotte from Ganishka's clutches, following which she would declare him as her betrothed and the supreme commander of the Midland Army. The renewed Band of the Hawk would then go on to help the port city of Ratanis, which was under siege by Ganishka. He would vanquish the emperor for the first time, following which the leader of the Holy See would pledge allegiance to him as the prophesized Falcon of Light. With this act, Griffith had not just managed to amass a large force, but also legitimized his claim to the throne through religion. Ganishka, who had previously been defeated by Griffith, however, still had a major role to play in this tale. Driven even madder by fear and paranoia after his defeat, the vanquished emperor lowers himself into an artifact called the Man-Made Behelit, which transformed him into a colossal monstrosity dubbed Shiva, or the twice-reincarnated Ganishka. As he stomps across the battlefield, crushing friends and foes alike, Griffith rushes to meet him in battle in his Femto form. However, before the two monsters can clash, Skull Knight intervenes and attempts to kill Griffith with a space-sundering slash from his sword of actuation. Unfortunately, Femto had anticipated this move and redirected the sword strike towards Ganishka, ripping not just the Emperor, but reality itself, unleashing what would come to be known as the Great Roar of the Astral World. With this act, the world was forever changed as the boundaries between the physical and astral realms were completely destroyed, as what once only existed in fiction became reality. Ganishka was transformed into a gigantic world tree, and from the ground, a giant city arose, which Griffith dubbed his capital Falconia. As the world became overrun by creatures from myths such as dragons, trolls, orcs, and other mythical beasts, Falconia was a safe haven for humanity, and millions of refugees began to pour into it, The city was extremely organized, and everyone was given a station according to their abilities. As it lay under the protection of the Falcon and his band of the Hawk, no one, not even the apostles within Griffith's army, dared harm the humans. He had achieved his dreams of not just having his own kingdom, but also creating a utopia of sorts. However, such things born out of dark deeds will surely come at a cost. It will be interesting to see what the future has in store for Falconia and Griffith. Griffith's personality explored. A dangerous obsession. Griffith's personality is a multifaceted one, with Miura going to great lengths to make sure that his antagonist had some serious depth to his character. Ever since his early childhood, Griffith had a burning ambition to one day have his own kingdom. While the other children he played with were content acting their age, even as a child, Griffith would look up at this looming castle and wish to live in one when he got older. We see the extent of this ambition immediately when no sooner had he become able to wield a weapon than he had started his own mercenary gang. Here, we can also talk about his natural charisma. Griffith had the unique ability to draw people towards him. Whether it was by his words or beauty, he was an individual that could easily sway the hearts of men and women he encountered. Just look at the diversity of the early Band of the Hawk members. A bandit, a miner, a tumbler, and a female slave. All of these people came from vastly different walks of life, but managed to stick together thanks to Griffith. They were all attracted to his personality and decided to help him achieve his dreams, as they felt it was the quickest way to achieve their own. As Griffith himself describes it, his dream was like a roaring fire, while the dreams of the members of his band were like smaller tinders that aided the great fire to continue to burn. Despite his speech about his idea of friends, he did deeply care about his comrades. However, after being completely shattered and broken, he convinced himself this wasn't the case. Within the astral realm, in the presence of the idea of evil, his ambition and ego burned out all of his human empathy along with his humanity. He sacrificed everything that he once held dear to achieve his dream. What emerged from that ritual was no longer Griffith, but Femto, a cold, unfeeling astral entity that served only himself and causality. While he had the ego, ambition, and dreams of Griffith, Femto had lost all of the warmth. After his rebirth, though he was still charismatic, people flocked to him due to their vision of him as a sort of messiah, not because of his humane nature. He was almost ethereal and divine, untouchable by mortal hands, the prophesized White Falcon, and not the grounded, charismatic, sometimes almost childlike leader of the Band of the Hawk that he once was. The only lingering feelings of humanity that he has are from fleeting moments after the Moonlight Child has taken over his vessel for a while. In this way, Miura developed Griffith's ever-evolving personality, managing to keep the audience intrigued by this fascinating character. Powers and abilities. Even as a human, Griffith was incredibly blessed with talents and attributes. When he decided to become a demonic entity, he retained all of these powers and was granted a few more on top, making him truly invincible. It's therefore only fitting that we discuss his abilities and powers. Master Swordsman. Unlike Guts, whose history as a fighter is quite well known, having grown up in a mercenary gang that made him earn his keep from the age he could wield a sword on the battlefield, we don't know anything about Griffith's combat history. By the time we meet and see him in action, he's already leagues above Guts, who has spent his entire life on the battlefield. Despite having no known master, he was a prodigious swordsman, leading many men that were older than him into battle. He knew no equal on the battlefield, save perhaps Nosferatu Zod, who was an apostle and already well beyond human limits. Even then, he and Guts managed to hold their own for quite some time before getting overwhelmed by him. While eventually he does lose to Guts in their duel to decide the former's freedom, this can be attributed mainly to him being unfocused by the psychological impact of Guts deciding to leave the Band of the Hawk. After he ascends, he's seen retaining his sword skills as the commander of the Midland Army and the new Band of the Hawk. Even pre-Femto, Griffith probably ranked as one of the top 3 greatest swordsmen in Berserk, such was his prowess with a blade. Spatial Manipulation. Femto has a true grip over reality and has the gift of spatial manipulation. His mastery over gravity allows him to create pinpoint gravity wells that can drag attacks and individuals to him, crushing them in an instant. He can then repel this concentrated mass as a projectile at his remaining foes. Femto is able to redirect blows that can literally cut through dimensions almost effortlessly. We see him exhibit this power when Skull Knight attacks him during his clash with Ganishka, and he redirects that blow, initiating the Great Roar of the astral plane. His ability to manipulate space also allows him near omnipresence, at least within the astral realm, anywhere, at any time, effortlessly. We can only assume that with the advent of Fantasia and most of his powers intact, he's still able to do that. Causal Awareness. As a member of the God Hand, Femto is an agent of causality and therefore has a deeper insight into its flow than anyone else save his compatriots. He was able to perfectly execute his plan at the Tower of Conviction, knowing full well the despair of the throngs of people watching Guts defeat their savior Mozgus would trigger the egg of the perfect world. While there might still be things hidden from him as well, having this sort of prescience is an ability that makes him almost a deity. Perhaps this is the reason that throughout history, the God Hand has also been referred to with deified titles. Once again, we have to bring up the great roar of the Astral Plane incident, where he manipulated the events in such a way that the Skull Knight would attack him, and he would use the power of the attack to bring about Fantasia and the birth of his kingdom, Falconia. Clairvoyance. During the Fantasia arc, we see that as part of his act as the prophesized Falcon of Light, Griffith is shown to have the ability to commune with the souls of the dead. He offers this service to the fallen of Falconia, where he coalesces their essence to allow them to speak with their loved ones before they depart the world. This ability could stem from the fact that he's still an astral being in essence, and souls are the currency that the God Hand deals in. This probably grants them knowledge in regard to the manipulation of souls. This is one of the supernatural powers that Griffith displays after his rebirth and contributes to our earlier point where he stated that his current version of him is viewed as almost a messiah and not a mere mortal. Flight! Having been dubbed the Falcon from the very start in an almost symbolic fashion, the moment he ascends, he asks the idea of evil to grant him wings. These wings were meant for him to soar above all of humanity in pursuit of his dreams and goals. If one looks at the character of Griffith and the wings, we can almost draw a parallel between him and the myth of Icarus. We know that Miura uses extensive imagery from myths around the world, so this isn't a complete impossibility. Just like Icarus, Griffith might fly too close to the proverbial sun, caught up in his hubris and ego, causing his eventual fall from grace. Is it even possible to kill Femto? As far as we know, just because you become a member of the God Hand doesn't make you completely immortal. This is because prior to the current roster of the group, aside from Void, the other 4 individuals were completely different. For whatever reason, those individuals no longer occupy this role, and the only logical conclusion we can come to is that they were most likely killed. However, we also know that conventional weaponry is almost useless against God Hand members, as seen when the hundreds of Kushan arrows aimed at Griffith simply failed to hit their mark for some weird reason. Even Guts' Dragon Slayer, whose blade has been tempered by the blood of hundreds of astral creatures, is barely able to damage him, managing to cut only a strand of his hair. As an agent of causality, it's presumed that the God Hand and Femto exist within the temporal flow, meaning that they're not grounded to any single point of time at any given moment. This is the reason that only the Sword of Behelit, which can cut through both space and time, is presumed to be the only weapon capable of harming them. We know that they don't age either, with Void having existed for at least 840 years. Griffith, despite being the villain, has the plot armor reserved for a protagonist, making him nigh invincible and immortal. Equipment and armor. From the very beginning of the series to the time where he's reborn as the Falcon of Light, Griffith's armor becomes steadily more ornate. He dons a fully white plate armor with prominent spalders and a breastplate with motifs on it. His solarets and sabatons, however, are far less prominent but serve their purpose. True to his name, his helm has an avian theme to it. There is a massive jump in the quality of his armor when the Band of the Hawk joins the Midland Army. While the basic design remains the same, his pauldrons become even more prominent, while the motifs on his breastplate are noticeably more ornate. The armor he wears as the Falcon of Light has to be the most detailed and beautiful version. The silver white plate is ridiculously ornate, with avian motifs everywhere. The plate armor is replete with feather patterns, with the right pauldron shaped to look like a wing. It is a visually striking armor befitting one who claims to be a chosen hero. Weakness. As an immortal demonic entity, we've already discussed that Femto is nigh invincible with next to no weaknesses. However, there might be some chinks in his armor that we haven't previously considered. We know that part of his human vessel is the demon child that the Egg of the World consumed during his rebirth. This child takes the form of a naked human child during full moon nights and appears around Casca and Guts. During this time, Griffiths' personality is repressed. If, somehow, this moment of vulnerability could be leveraged, they could do some serious harm to Femto in the process. We also know that after being reborn as a human, it might just be possible to at least damage the human form of Griffith if he's caught off guard. Finally, this sort of actuation might also be a legitimate threat that might actually be able to sunder Griffith from both the physical and astral plane, killing him permanently. Marvelous verdict! Griffith has to be one of the most iconic villains in all of manga and anime. He sits right atop the pantheon of bad guys like Frieza, Madara Uchiha, Aizen, and Blackbeard. That said, the best part of his story is far from over. Griffith's choices during the eclipse transform him into a tragic figure, not one that evokes sympathy, but one whose greatness is inseparable from his monstrous choices. He's one of the most well-written characters whose development we get to witness from his early childhood as a street urchin to a prophesized hero. His rise and fall from grace perfectly embody the themes of Berserk, like the price of ambition, the meaning of humanity, and the illusion of freedom, destiny, and free will. His unwavering pursuit of his ideals makes him an almost admirable figure. While his cruelty and obsession remove any form of empathy that one may feel for him, Griffith, in his own way, represents human potential just like Guts. They both are willing to do anything to achieve their goals. Despite his ascension and rebirth as Femto, due to his ego, ambition, and lust, Griffith's character remains very much grounded. This makes him more than just an evil villain. Instead, we like to think of him as one of the most enduring and disturbing figures in all of anime and manga. We hope that with this video, we were able to not only increase your knowledge about Griffith, but pique your interest in Berserk as well, because honestly, it's fantastic. If you like this video, be sure to check out the rest of our channel. We cover all of your favorite manga and anime, including Berserk, daily. Thanks for sticking with us right to the end of this one, but for now, it's time for us to say goodbye. We hope to see you soon in the next one, but until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.